Body. So welcome to Dear Black Body. My name is Crystal Tennille Irby. I am a writer, a podcaster, a multimedia artist, a mom of four, a partner to one, and what else and I'm also a doula.
And I am Dominique Verdreen Chukwu, and I am a licensed marriage and family therapist in the state of South Carolina. I am a former instructor of marriage and family therapy courses, as well as psychology and human services courses in some of the local colleges and universities in this area. I am also a mom of three, and I'm just really excited for us to be here today with you, and thank you for coming in. And so we're going to be having a dialogue between myself and Crystal, but this is going to be also an interactive webinar, so there's some things that we're going to be asking of you. And so in having this dialogue and it being interactive, there's some points we'd like to make out and bring to your attention if you would be willing. It's kind of like our community agreement. So the first community agreement is really showing up and being present, which you guys are here right now. We appreciate that. And what we mean by choosing to be present, we want you to, even when things you might hear from us may be something that's jarring or you don't necessarily agree with, we ask that you still remain present in the conversation that we're about to have. We also ask that you speak from your own experience when that time comes up. Your experience is important and valid, and even though it may be different from others, it's important for us to hear. We ask that you speak with unconditional positive regard, and pretty much what we mean by that is you're going to hear things that you don't necessarily agree with, you may not like, and that's fine. We don't meet for consensus or agreement, but we do ask you to accept what you hear other people's experiences to be. We also ask that you listen even when you do not agree with what you're hearing. Once again, we're not here for consensus. If it happens, that's great, but it's not necessary for us to have this dialogue. We strive for excellence and not perfection. And so what you'll hear from us sometimes, you might be like, well, that wasn't perfectly stated, and that's okay. Like I said, we strive to do our best, and we don't believe in perfection. And if something is not said during this dialogue, we ask that you take it upon yourself and say it. We're open, and we know that we're not perfect, so we're not going to be able to cover everything.
Okay. Thank you, Dominique.
You're welcome.
So next we're going to go into ritual and intention. Before we start the presentation, we want to establish a ritual and we want to be clear about what our intention is. So what I would like everyone to do, and this may seem kind of odd because this is virtual, but it's very important. I want all of us to take 3 deep breaths in and then exhale, and you'll be able to do it with me. And the reason that I want to establish this as our ritual is because the subject matter that we're talking about today is very intense, and it can become heavy and it can become uncomfortable. And what the breath does is it expands the body and it releases tension, and it allows us more space to examine that discomfort, and it allows us to let our defense mechanisms down. So on the count of 3, I want us to inhale, and then I'll tell you when to exhale. 1, 2, 3. Take a deep breath in. Let it out. Now, the next time we take a deep breath in, I want everyone to let it out and make a sound, because what I want that breath to do is go down into your body. Okay? Here we go. 1, 2, 3. Inhale in. Exhale. One more time. Inhale in. Exhale. So whenever you feel some tension in your body, whenever you feel some heaviness or discomfort in your body throughout the presentation, close your eyes, take a deep breath in. And sometimes you might have to go, ooh, that was a lot. That counts as a deep breath as well. And now I wanted us to take about a minute or two, and on whatever you're taking notes on, I want you to write down your intention. I want you to write down your intention at the top of that paper. And so whatever your intention is, my intention today is to learn. My intention today is to be open. My intention today is to gain knowledge. My intention today is to listen. Whatever your intention is, I want you to write it on the top of that paper. And again, after you take your deep breaths, go back to your intention so you can center yourself back into the presentation. So let's take about a minute to come up with an intention. It doesn't have to be deep. It can be just really simple. Your intention may be, I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to talk. Whatever your intention is, it doesn't have to be deep. Let's just write it down. So we'll give you about a minute to do that. Give me about 15 more seconds. Okay. You can have more than one intention.
Okay. I have some.
Dom is an overachiever, so I figured she'd have more than one.
It's important.
Okay. All right. So thank you. Thank you for participating in that. I appreciate it. So we're going to go ahead and get started. So embodying history. This is a quote from Tarana Due, who is a horror fiction writer, a Black woman who's a horror fiction writer. She says, "It is a cumulative message to Black people that we don't matter. Our lives don't matter, and that the best we're good for is to sacrifice our body so that white people may flourish." Now, the importance of this slide is to talk specifically to the history of the body, the Black body. So we don't arrive in a vacuum. We as people have a history, and the Black body has a particular history in Western culture, one that is entrenched or tied to enslavement. And so it's very difficult to separate the Black body from that history when as a Black person and as a Black person. So for centuries, systemic and institutional oppression deemed the only worth of Black folks was their Black body. So Black people were brought to this country and to the Caribbean and also to Europe specifically for their bodies, to be a physical labor force. And not only to be a physical labor force, but to produce a physical labor force. So the only worth that the Black body that Black people had when brought to, when stolen from Africa was their bodies. And we really have to take like some time and just really, really, really think about that was the only word. We weren't brought here for our minds. We weren't brought here for some other talent, although we had that, because they didn't take slaves from Africa. They took people who were doctors, people who were healers, people who were mothers, people who were fathers. So these people had skills when they were taken from their land, but that wasn't cared about. What was cared about is the physical labor that they could offer and the labor force that they could produce. So much so that that the world's economy, not just America's economy, but the world's economy was built on the physical labor of Black people. I'll give you a perfect example. Everyone is familiar with Lehman Brothers. Lehman Brothers is one of the big three banks that America could not allow to fail. And that got bailed out during the economic downturn. What do you call that? Starts with an R. I can't think of it.
Gosh, no.
Okay, I can't think of the name of it, but y'all know what I'm talking about.
Recession.
The recession, right. So how did Lehman Brothers get their start? Well, Lehman Brothers was a small company in Alabama, and then they began to offer slave owners loans to buy slaves. And when slave owners defaulted on the loan, Lehman Brothers became the owners of the slaves. Lehman Brothers also offered insurance to slave owners, so their slaves could be insured. And so that company was literally built on Black bodies, right? And now that company is so entrenched in the world's economy that we can't allow it to fit, that it's not allowed to fail. It is something that sustained us. And had it not been for the bodies of Black people, that company would not be that entrenched in our economy. And that's just one company. Aetna is also another one. And I just give that as an example of how entrenched the Black body is in capitalism and the building of the world's economy. Enslavement was not just a Southern phenomenon. It had a over 50% impact on America's economy. That's how entrenched it was in the building of the systems and institutions of this country. So Black bodies were literally capital on which systems and institutions that we still participate in today were built. Yet they were viewed as 3/5 of a human being, right? And that 3/5 built our electoral college system, which is the system we use to vote for president, because they were trying to figure out how many votes each state could have. And the votes were based on the amount of people in the states. Well, if you don't see enslaved people as humans, how do you count them? You count them as 3/5. And the number of electoral college votes that each state has is not based on all the people that were in that state. Right? It's based on, it didn't recognize all the people that were in that state. And we still use that today. Another example is the medical, the medical system that we participate in. Gynecology, the quote unquote father of gynecology, Marion Sims, who has a statue here in South Carolina, did all his experiments on enslaved women with no anesthesia. Henrietta Lacks, every cure that's ever tested, anything we try to do in an area that's not conducive to human beings, they take HeLa cells. Henrietta Lacks was a poor Black woman who died of cervical cancer, and Johns Hopkins took her cells and examined them, and they regenerate on their own, the only cells to do that. And they're still used today. She was never paid for it. Her family was poor after she died, and to this day still can't afford health care. And every vaccine that we have is as a result of being able to be tested on those particular cells. So the Black, I want us to really understand that we do not show up empty. We do not show up in a vacuum. These bodies have a history that we really have to understand in order to really be able to serve Black folks in a productive way. And this history has had an impact on the Black body. You know, DNA studies have shown that historical generational trauma does not change DNA, but it impacts DNA. There was a study done on people who went through the Holocaust. They examined their DNA and saw the change in not the change, but the impact on their DNA. And it even impacted their children, even if they didn't talk to their children about the Holocaust, didn't say anything to their children about the Holocaust. Their children's DNA didn't change, but it had a little marker of trauma on it that was different from other people. And so it has a real literal impact. We really, really carry these things around with us, not only mentally, but also physically. We carry these things around with us. And one of the examples that's happened is if you look at the Black maternal health rate, the reason for the Black maternal health rate is not because of race, but it's because of racism, that Black women have become so used to experiencing racism, we don't even recognize it as trauma and stress, but our bodies do, and it's impacting the children that we carry. The next quote is, "We're done watching and waiting while this invention called whiteness uses and abuses us, burying Black people out of sight and out of mind while extracting culture, our dollars, our entertainment like oil, Black gold, ghettoizing and demonizing our creations, then stealing them, gentrifying our genius, and then trying us on like costumes before discarding our bodies like the rinds of strange fruits." So the point of that quote, and that's by Jesse Williams, who's an actor, the point of that quote is because people are willing to take so many things from Black people, our music, our hairstyles, even our body types, but they don't actually want the Black body. They just want pieces of it. And so we really have to reckon with that and recognize that so we can be more effective and come up with more effective solutions when serving Black folks.
In addition to what you were talking about earlier with the Holocaust, so researchers are looking at epigenetics.
Right, that's what's epigenetics.
So
Dominique knows all the vocabulary.
So what we've noticed, like you stated, they've done it with Holocaust survivors. They've done retrospective cohort studies where they looked at men who went to the Civil War, the Union, the Sons of the Union,
soldiers,
and they were looking at how trauma was passed on to next generations, how it's been expressed. They also did this with in the Netherlands, when Germany occupied the Netherlands and after World War II, 1944, what they noticed was prisoners of war. They noticed that even though their generation, subsequent generations who weren't in the war, they noticed that they too, I'm sorry, let me back up. They were paying attention to the mothers. Right. The mothers experienced the famine in the Netherlands during that time because Germany had placed an embargo on food. So due to the famine, a lot of these moms were having children and they just had like maybe 800 calories a day of food. And so what they noticed, 2 generations out, the children experienced malnourished. They were having symptoms of malnourishment for people who were actually experienced the famine. Right. But what's interesting is we'll see that it was done in the Netherlands. It's done with Sons of the Union and some Holocaust survivors, but it's not being done with ascendants of American chattel slavery.
And there are 2 things about that. That is a reminder to me about Flint, the water crisis in Flint, and how it's affecting mothers there, their children there, and the long-term effects of that. The other thing about that is that it's really about the Black body, because no matter how much power, wealth, that a Black person attains, when they walk out into the world, no one knows how much power they have. No one knows how much wealth they have. They are still seen and treated as a Black person until they communicate their wealth. Another example that it's about the Black body is that having a Black president really didn't impact or transform the systems and institutions that we operate under, or give Black people more access to power or wealth. And so it's really, or more resources to build. And so that's how we know that it's really, really about the body and all of the systems that we operate on, our health system, our economic system, our education system, is really about the physical body. And that turns into mental, that impacts us mentally, but it has long-term physical implications as well.
And so when you talk about the physical body and the trauma that they experience, we know from research that's been done by, there was a study that was done by the Center of Disease Control and Prevention, and health conglomerate, Kaiser Permanente. Some of you may be familiar with it. It's called the ACEs study, Adverse Childhood Experiences. And what they noticed a link between people who experienced some form of abuse or neglect and long-term health consequences. And we know this. It was a huge study done on 17,000 people across 3 decades. Okay. And while we understand that trauma is a major contributor to our bodily, mental, and social ills, we don't look at racism.
We don't.
We refuse to look at that.
We don't. We look at race, but we don't look at racism. And here's the difference. So Black people are disproportionately affected by chronic illnesses, such as, or chronic diseases, such as high blood pressure, right? And so we think, well, race is a factor because it disproportionately affects Black people. And only looking at race as a factor says, well, Black folks are doing something wrong. All of them getting this high blood pressure. But if we look at racism as the issue, then we have to look at the entire all the systems and institutions that we operate in and see how that's impacting Black people. And again, if you go back to enslavement and how Black people were giving scraps of food and had to eat it and make something out of it, the long-term health on enslaved people's body, but also the long-term health effects generationally.
So right now, we're going to ask you, if you wouldn't mind, to please take a sheet of paper and write down or draw whatever you've been taught or learned about the Black body, okay? And if you're a non-Black person, I'm going to ask that you write down what you've been taught about the Black body. And then after that, as a non-Black person, I also want you to take a moment and write down what you've been taught about your body. So we're going to go ahead and take a minute.
You know, I like to do
okay, 2 minutes. Do 2 minutes. We'll do 2 minutes.
Because the minute gets you surface, but when you go into that second minute, you got to really
dig the timekeeper.
Gotta dig deep.
Okay, we'll do 2 minutes.
We'll work it out.
We'll work it out. Okay. And please don't limit your responses to describing how we utilize our bodies to function. But I also want you to think about, factors such as movement regarding our bodies, such as dance, our sexuality, athleticism, ableism, etc.
What have you been told about the Black body in regards to those things?
Yes. As well as aesthetics too. Okay, you have 30 more seconds.
They can leave some of their stuff in the comments.
Yeah.
So we can Dom and I are going to talk about some of the things that we were being told about the Black body. But we want you to list yours in the comments, and we can take a look at those later and discuss those during our question and answer portion of the presentation.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what came up for us? Or
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
So for me, one of the things that always comes up for me, specifically with the Black female body, is the over-sexualization of the Black female body, which renders Black women sort of extreme when it comes to that it doesn't allow us to freely explore and express our sexuality without this historical context coming into play. As an artist, someone that I loved was Josephine Baker. And so to see her dance around, to see her dance, to see her perform, I saw her as an artist, as a performer, and as someone who was comfortable in their sexuality. And so I remember when I discovered her, and one of the first pictures that I saw of her was of her topless and in a banana skirt. And that has so many racial implications when you think about Black people historically being called monkeys, or when you think about the physical bodies of Black women being used for only sex. And so what ends up happening is we disconnect with our bodies. And Black women disconnect with their bodies. And so by disconnecting with our bodies, when someone expressing their sexuality openly and unapologetically comes before us, when I was in my early 20s, I was often confused about how to interpret that, because a part of me saw my white counterparts not being judged, but definitely not being judged as harshly as Black women were. And I think what that goes back to is when you were literally brought to this country to reproduce and for the sexual pleasure of white men, it really, really impacts how you view your sexuality. And so you have to process that historically. And so when I think about the Black female body, I often think about how it's been over-sexualized and how that has impacted our ability or inability to freely explore and express our sexuality. And also this notion that Black women are able to just procreate. Like Black women don't have infertility issues. And I think that's rooted in enslavement, because Black women who were enslaved gave birth to somewhere between 8 and 10 children. The average Black enslaved woman gave birth to somewhere between 8 and 10 children. And so there's this myth out there that Black women are just able to procreate. And you have this welfare myth out there that Black women are just sitting around and having all of these babies and fleecing the system to, that's why they're having all these babies. And so those are the things that come up for me when I think about the Black body.
Okay. So when I think about the Black body, several things come up for me. And while in my family, I've been taught, that we're strong, that we're beautiful people, I've gotten messages outside of my family that, talks about the Black body being lazy, even though we were brought here for the purposes of being dehumanized and abused for the purposes of labor, that the Black body is lazy. Whereas I see it as, have anybody ever thought that maybe Black bodies are tired? So we
overwork ourselves.
Yes.
We overwork ourselves.
Yeah.
To prove that we're not lazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then that the Black body is inferior in comparison to other bodies. And for Black women, that we're good for labor.
It's inferior except when it benefits white supremacy. Because in sports, it's not seen as inferior.
Or entertainment.
Right.
Yes.
But those things benefit systems and institutions that give capital, that give money to white owners. So,
but due to time constraints, we're going to go ahead and move on. And so we want to share with you Okay, never mind.
Okay. Sorry. So a lot of this presentation was inspired by Sonja Renee Taylor, who is an activist, the founder of a platform called The Body Is Not an Apology. And also she wrote a book entitled The Body Is Not an Apology.
Yeah.
And so this presentation was inspired by her book. That's Sonja Renee Taylor.
Yeah.
She's also a poet. Living in a female body, a Black body, an aging body, a fat body, a body with mental illness is to awaken daily to a planet that expects a certain set of apologies to already live on our tongues. There's a level of not enough or too much sewn into these strands of difference. Recent discoveries in the field of epigenetics have established how the traumas and resiliency of our ancestors are being passed on to us molecularly. Being sorry is literally a lesson in our DNA. And so what Sonja, what her book talks about and what her book is a journey towards is radical self-love. That all of these messages that we are given about the Black body, that it's not enough or if it's too much, but whatever it is, it's not normal. Sonja rejects that and gives us information and also some questions to answer to put us on the path to stop apologizing for the bodies that we show up in and accept them and live boldly in them and challenge systems and institutions to transform in a way that celebrates not just our differences, but that we have a culture of we have a culture of difference that is viewed as, you know, beautiful and helpful. It's something that helps us grow and something that helps us progress.
Mm-hmm. And helps us heal.
And helps us heal. And helps us heal. Helps us heal. So now we're going to get into the meat of the presentation, and we're going to ask you 3 questions. And so our first, and to sort of process, to sort of process some of the information that we gave you, to sort of process your lived experience, right? Mm-hmm. We want you to do some exploration here, okay? So our first question is, who or what does your body belong to? And so if you look at the presentation, the graphic that that says spiritual, family, community, world. This is a graphic that was established by a professor, Dr. Naeem Akbar, who's a psychologist and was a professor at Florida State University. And this is how we see ourselves. We have a spiritual self, or just, you know, ourself, our existence. Then we have a family self, people who we are close to, people who we depend on, people who we rely on. Then we have a community. It can be our physical space where we live, but also people who we are accountable to or who we identify with beyond our family circle. And then there's the world, which is the entire world. And then we have, so I took that and I created a graphic kind of based on that, but I added some things. So we have our spiritual self, our existence, the core of who we are, but then we have a physical self. And then we have a cultural self, the people who we identify with, who we tie our customs, our beliefs, how we exist, how we move into the world, our language to. And then we have a political self, how we navigate the world, what we believe should be happening into the world to make the world the best place for our existence. And then we have an economic self. How do we sustain ourselves for survival, right? So based on these levels of self, or levels of existence, your spiritual existence, your physical existence, your cultural existence, political existence, and economic existence, who or what does your body belong to? And I'll give you an example. Right now, I always say the world is on fire. Protests are, and that's not a bad thing to me. Protests are everywhere that we look. And there are people who are putting their physical bodies on the front lines for justice, to remain in the forefront, for systemic and institutional oppression, for the dismantling of for systemic and institutional oppression to remain on the tip of our tongues, in the forefront of our minds. There are people on a daily basis who are putting their physical bodies on the line. So politically, their bodies belong to a movement, right? Economically, what labor are you doing? What labor are you doing to sustain yourself? What percentage of your body belongs to your job versus being poured into your spiritual, the core of yourself, right? So we want to take about 2 minutes to answer this question. Who or what does, I think we can do 2 minutes. Who or what does your body belong to? And you can do it percentage wise. Yeah. You can do it percentage wise.
And you know, Crystal, when you brought up this graphic, I really appreciated how you put culturally. Mm-hmm. But you know, there's been some conversations around, you know, is Black even a culture? Mm-hmm. You know, there's an African American culture, but then there's also in some communities, Black is a culture.
Yes,
but it's not always recognized as such.
Can you say more about that?
So what we'll see, or what I've seen.
And Dom is cutting into your 1 minute.
Okay, I just never mind.
Point that out. No, I'm just kidding, Dom. No. I really want you to speak more about that. Well, they can do that while you're speaking more about that.
I'm going to try to make it okay. So pretty much what you'll see is the appropriation of a lot of things that are affiliated with the Black culture. Mm-hmm. But yet, if I try to say, you know, you'll hear people say, well, you know, Black, you really don't have a culture because you're not from, you know, the Caribbean, or you're not really from Africa. Your ancestors, you know, you're pretty much having to deal with being colonized here, being oppressed here, and so you really don't have a culture. So I've heard some of these things before, even though I disagree and really believe that, yes, there is a culture.
So let's just a little to talk about that. Culturally is often rooted in your physical tie to the land, but culture can also be rooted in identity and existence, right? And so there's definitely a Black American culture that has some roots in African culture, but it's indigenous and it grew out of Black enslavement. There are certain cultures, there's even language. Listen, if you got language, you got culture. There's language. There's African American vernacular that, yes, hey boo, all of that is language, which gets commodified. And that language even has rules. And so cultural is not just tied to a land. That is sort of a very Western lens of looking at culture. Now, Black culture is not monolithic. Within Black culture, there are various cultures within that culture, just like all cultures. There are various cultures within the Italian culture. You know what I'm saying? So it's definitely
Black bodies don't get.
But Black bodies, and that's why we're talking about Black bodies, because Black bodies aren't differentiated culturally. They're not. Okay. Dom is ready to move on.
Yes, we need to move on.
Okay. So,
when does your body feel safe? I want you to take a minute and think about when your body feels safe. Okay, so I hope that you guys will wrote down some stuff about when your body feels safe. And Crystal and I, we had a little bit of a
discussion about this.
Yeah,
right.
Because
we struggled with this question.
Yes, and for me, this question is vitally important because one of the stories, narratives about Black bodies is that they're dangerous. They're dangerous and they're threatening. Okay.
Right.
And they're impervious to pain.
Right.
okay? Which is one of the reasons why Marion Sims did all these experiments, because he believed that the Black body didn't experience pain, right? So you want to talk about what the issue was with regards to us?
So the issue that we had with this is the word safe. We felt like it was important to ask this question, but the issue that we have with this is the word safe. Exactly. If your body is viewed as dangerous, what spaces can you go in, or what spaces are you ever in where your body literally feels safe, and safety that cannot be threatened at any moment? Yes. And so when we talked about that, safety is not the same for everyone.
No, it is not.
And it's not the same for everyone. And so that's the issue. Like, we were like, well, are we going to ask, because we were struggling with the word safe, because a neighborhood that a non-Black person may feel safe in is not a neighborhood that a Black person may be safe in. And let's not even talk about neighborhoods, but just existence, period. The way that I move through the world is based on my perception of safety in the world. Yes. And so if my literal body is viewed as dangerous, if when a person sees me, they on some level see danger, where can I ever feel safe? And all of my movement, I'll give you a perfect example. Black parents have to have a talk with their children about being stopped by the police.
It's all the talk.
No matter where you are, right? Because your literal body is viewed as dangerous.
In addition to being viewed as dangerous, the Black body is viewed oftentimes as unattractive. You mentioned it earlier as being hypersexual. It's also viewed as being invulnerable. It's impervious to pain, it's invulnerable, it's dangerous, it's threatening. So what ends up happening in the society we live in, Black bodies are believed to have this need to be managed and controlled at all costs.
And so that is really, I'm just going to go back for a minute. And so that's really connected to what your body belongs to. What your body belongs to is connected to what makes your body feel safe. If I feel like I'm going to be safer here, then I'm going to spend more. If I feel like I'm going to be safer if I have more money, right? As a Black body, if I feel like I'm going to be safer if I have more money, I'm going to spend, my body is going to belong to a lot of labor. If I feel like my body is going to be safer by fighting systemic and institutional oppression, my body is going to belong to the movement. And there's no judgment of the percentages that your body, of what your body belongs to. But what we have to think about is all of those things have impact on the body.
And the body, trauma, when we experience trauma, the response that we have is connected to hormones and stress hormones. And what we know from research that we see, when the issue of trauma is about safety. When your body doesn't feel safe, what happens? It responds either in flight, freeze, or fight. And in addition to that, we need to be sensitive to the fact that people don't realize when we don't feel safe, our lizard brain is what comes up. So our ability to think well and properly is compromised significantly, because right then and there, the body is not concerned about what I'm thinking, what you're thinking. The bodies are concerned about regaining sense of safety. So my question is, what happens when you never feel safe?
Okay, that's what I was going to say. So just real quick, Dom. I know, just real quick. So just real quick, I just want to go back to spiritual, physical, cultural, politically, and what does your body belong to? Specifically talking about the Black body, this breakdown is often a response to trauma and trying to attain some safety from being re-traumatized, right? What would happen if this breakdown was rooted in freedom and healing, and it's not a reaction to trauma, how would and the goal to get some sort of safety so you won't be re-traumatized, how different would this breakdown look if it were rooted in healing and freedom? Mm-hmm. And so I think that instead of asking, when does your body feel safe, the question would become when does my body feel brave?
Yes.
Because you don't have to be safe. You don't have to feel safe to be brave. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Oh yeah.
So I think that would change sort of the breakdown and root the Black body in something different. It would root it in freedom and healing, which recognizes that the body has been traumatized. Yes. Because it needs to be healed, but it doesn't stay there. There's a plan to come out of that, right?
And I think I would say that Black bodies have been brave.
Yes,
not acknowledged for
that's
that.
True. I would
that's
say
not,
that.
Black bodies have been brave and resilient to be able to deal with all this that's happened.
But it's not acknowledged as brave. It's acknowledged as rebellion.
Yes.
Lazy. Mm-hmm. And it's acknowledged as they're just so strong. They don't really break down. They don't really feel pain.
Yes.
Right. So we know that that's a lot. So we're going to return to our ritual right now. And we're going to take some deep breaths. Okay. We're going to take a couple of seconds just to take a deep breath. Okay. A couple of seconds. Okay. Here we go. Let's breathe in. Breathe. One last time. Okay. Okay.
So now we'd like to take a moment, a minute, and ask our Black bodies to forgive us. Okay. So as a Black person, what do you need to ask your Black body to forgive you for? And if you are a non-Black person, what do you need to ask forgiveness for regarding the Black body?
And I'll give you some examples. So as a Black woman, one of the things that I had to ask my body for forgiveness for was sexual repression, not allowing my body to feel free enough to explore and express myself sexually, and the impact, the negative impacts that had on my body and my being. As a white person, or not a white person, but as a non-Black person or a white person, one of the things that you can think about is, do you need to ask the Black body for forgiveness? Mm-hmm. For forgiveness for not seeing it, for rendering it invisible, or discounting it, mm-hmm. for co-opting pieces of the Black body, like I want, quote unquote, big lips or big butt, you know what I'm saying? Or not giving the Black body space, or assuming things about people because they show up in a Black body. And be honest with yourself.
Yes.
Be honest with yourself. We all have work to do. Be honest with yourself.
Or, another example is the expectation of Black bodies to make white bodies feel comfortable, mm-hmm. So these are just some of the examples. And this is really just about self-inventory. It's not really about shaming us, mm-hmm. shaming Black bodies.
Shame. We believe in freedom.
We do believe in freedom. But I can't release myself from something I don't acknowledge.
Right, exactly.
So it is vitally important for us to take that time and ask the Black body for forgiveness.
Okay. And we're going to give you about 2 minutes, although Dominique's mind may explode.
Yes.
We're going to give you about 2 minutes.
No, 2 minutes. 1
to
minute.
Ask for forgiveness.
Let's just do 1 minute.
I think they need more time to ask for forgiveness.
I'm trusting that this is just the beginning, and we're going to continue this virtually with our virtual friends.
You're already a minute and a half.
Krista, we're going to have a talk after this.
It's okay.
I know we're rooted in freedom, but we do have a time limit.
Shh. You have about 30 more seconds. Okay, so please share some of the things that came up for you in the comments, and we can talk about those later. So, what do we? Our next question is sort of a piggyback off of this question: is if I were truly free in my body, what would I be doing differently? If I were truly free in my body, and think back to that breakdown of your being. Think back to the idea of safety versus bravery. Think back to being rooted in freedom and healing and not trauma and the perceived idea of safety. Okay. So we're going to take about
20 seconds.
A minute. I just started the timer.
We gotta go back to lunch. We gotta go back to work.
I know, but we
don't want to lose our virtual family.
We're not going to lose them. We're not going to lose you because we have a little bit of time. About 30 more seconds. I promise, Dom, I have the timer right here. It's 30 more seconds.
That you added.
No, I didn't. I just pressed this. I'm going to cut it off at 30 seconds. Okay. And again, please share with us in the comments. Okay. So. Okay. So this is a poem by Lucille Clifton, and we're going to transition into some solutions. And so, or some techniques, some takeaways, right? So, Won't You Celebrate With Me by Lucille Clifton, who is a wonderful, wonderful poet who writes about the body a lot. Won't you celebrate with me what I have shaped into a kind of life? I had no model, born in Babylon, both non-white and woman. What did I see to be except myself? I made it up. Here on this bridge between starshine and clay, my one hand holding tight, my other hand, come celebrate with me that every day something has tried to kill me. And yet I rise. That's what it says there. I can't see the bottom of it. And yet I rise. And yet I rise. That was the ending of it. So what do we do with all this information? What is this poem and has failed? Has tried to kill me. I'm thinking Maya Angelou. Yes, a different poet, but both wonderful. So what do we do with this? This is what Lucille Clifton is speaking to. What is next for us? What do we do with all this information that we have acquired? And what we do with this information is two very different things. Often people want to think about healing and coming together and how we move forward as a coming together. But since Black bodies have a different history than non-Black bodies, our solutions diverge in terms of what Black people must do and what non-white people must do. So first of all, let's talk about non-white people. So this is a video and analysis by Ebony Janice, who is the founder and CEO of Black Girl Mixtape. And the volume may be a little bit low, so you may have to turn it up on your own computer in order to hear it. But this is at the hearing. Stephon Clark was shot and killed by the police. And this is at the hearing where it was said that no charges will be brought, that the police will not be charged with shooting him. And this is his brother. So let's take a look at this.
This video has had me emotional all morning because I've never seen people with white privilege use their privilege in this kind of way. Notice that everywhere he moves, they move. This little Asian woman is about to hop up here in these heels, and this white man with the leather coat put his arm around to make sure they didn't touch him. But look, they're never trying to touch the non-Black person, ever. This man in the back done grabbed his baton for what? The only people being violent are the police. So if you ever try to tell me that your whiteness doesn't have any privilege, or your proximity to whiteness is not a privilege, look at this. They're not trying to touch anybody but a Black man. This is what it looks like being accomplished.
Okay. And so what Ebony Janice is saying in this video is that, let me go back to presenter. I can't. Okay. What Ebony Janice is saying in this video is that it's not enough for white people to be allies when Black bodies are literally being killed. You have to be an accomplice in protecting Black bodies. And that's a physical example of what being an accomplice in protecting Black bodies looks like. Okay, so the next video is Theory and Analysis by Thea Monnier. Thea is the creator of a course called the Underground Railroad. And this, what I just talked about, is what non-Black people and white people can do. And so what you have to figure out is how in your service can you literally be an accomplice to protecting Black bodies.
And it doesn't have to be physical. That's the other way. There's other ways in which you can protect Black bodies.
Mm-hmm. Yes. I mean, yes, you're right.
Institutions and all this other
policies
that are
created to harm Black bodies. You're right. So let's see here. Okay, so Thea Monnier is the creator of a course called Underground Railroad. She is a licensed marriage and family therapist. She's also a writer, and this is what Black people can do in order to heal and protect the Black body. Okay.
And I'm moving into what I'm coining as, you hear it here first, the Underground Railroad to accessing our joy. I want to build this underground railroad. And to me, that form of activism means like, yeah, they're trying to destroy our bodies and they're trying to come after us. But in that action, what they're really trying to kill is our access to joy, right? If you come for me and I'm still celebrating and I'm still dancing and I'm still connecting and I'm still loving and I'm still connected to my family and I'm still connected to my culture, you haven't destroyed me yet. So it's really when you take my joy or my access to joy that you win, because then I'm hopeless. And the thing about trauma work is it really deals with trauma, yes, and it helps people to understand the trauma, but that's where they leave us. They don't bring us back to access to joy or pleasure. For me, it's why a lot of Black women experience joy and pleasure outside of their own bodies, because our bodies have been commodified so much. You can take pieces of us, our butts, our lips, or this or that, our hair or whatever, and never take us, the whole of us or who we are.
Okay. So that's Thea Monnier. That's an excerpt from our podcast, Dear Black Mamas, shameless plug there. And she's talking about what Black people need to do to heal their bodies is find their way back to pleasure and joy within their bodies. What gives your body pleasure? How do you like to be touched? What things do you like to feel on your body? How do you celebrate your own body? How do you love your own body? Because Black people have been denied that access to joy and pleasure and made to feel guilty if they take the time to explore that. Because if we take the time to explore that and we're not laboring, then we're lazy. We're not working hard enough. We're not going to get ahead economically. And so her solution to Black people healing the Black body is Black people accessing joy, pleasure, and that will help us connect more to our culture. We finally got to the part that Dom has been dying to get to.
Let's see if we have family still out there.
Do we? Yes, we do have people still out there. We have people out there.
Let's see.
I'm just gonna go presentation.
Okay.
See, we have people out there.
Okay,
people are still there.
Okay.
Yes. So now is the time where we are going to facilitate some questions. Philadelphia Fight is going to facilitate those questions for us.
Okay, great. Guys, that was an amazing presentation. Can I tell you? We are also having discussion, asking ourselves those very questions, those of us who are Black and non-Black. And so it evoked a lot of dialogue.
Great.
Kind of had some of us on the verge of tears because it was really powerful.
That's why we have to breathe. That's why the ritual was breathing and establishing.
Right. We got it when we saw the quote. I said, oh, that's why she said breathe.
You know, no one really teaches us how to use breath. And it's so vital and so important to our existence. But nobody really teaches us how to use it. So that's key. As a doula, that's key for me.
Mm-hmm. So for the sake of time, we have a lot of questions and comments. So the first batch of comments are specific to the messaging about what they are told about Black bodies, how they hear about Black bodies or perceive Black bodies. And so some of the comments were, we were taught that Black is ugly and dirty. Black bodies, strong, powerful, and beautiful. Black bodies, I'm going to read it as it's written. Black bodies, exotic, sexual, available for consumption, large butt, big dicks, ashy, nappy hair, and deviant. Our other bodies, inferior, need to get a tan in order to look better, want curly hair and big butts. White bodies, pure, clean, the ideal, beautiful, healthy. The Black female body is beautiful, thick, and voluptuous. Black women are confident. My body belongs to God. I see myself as a spiritual being and always have the victory in any setting. So the next comment is about the question about when does my body feel safe? Like, what does safe mean? And one person responded.
Can I just take a minute to talk about white bodies being seen as pure and Black bodies being seen as dirty. That was, if anyone has ever seen the film Birth of a Nation, not the one by Nate Parker, but the first Birth of a Nation, which was transformational in filmmaking. In film school, we had to watch it because it was transformational in terms of sound and color and some other things. But the crux of that film is fear of the Black male body. This is the crux of that film. The crux of that film is fear of the Black male body raping the white female body. And so there were things that happened after enslavement. Let's take the murder of Emmett Till, for example, as just an example. But his murder was literally to uphold or in response to a Black male body disrespecting the white female body. And that whole dichotomy is based on how race was intentionally set up to view the Black male body, to view the Black body and the white body. So that's deeply, deeply rooted. It's not just something that we think, but it's deeply, deeply rooted intentionally to perpetuate enslavement, and after enslavement was over, to perpetuate Jim Crow apartheid laws and lynchings and the murder of Black people.
And now mass incarceration.
So those things are intentional. It's not just something that the media is perpetuating. It is in the systems and institutions that we live in.
And policies are reinforcing these very things.
A perfect example is, let's look at the crack epidemic versus the opioid epidemic. So crack was seen as, the Black drug. And those people who were addicted to crack were not given sympathy, compassion, and treatment. They were criminalized. And those mothers who had children while on crack were criminalized. Were called crackheads, and their parental rights were terminated. Now, the crack epidemic hit the Black middle class community hard. There were thriving Black middle class communities right here in my community that I could ride through in the early 80s that the crack epidemic took out, just like the opioid epidemic is taking out white middle class communities. But those rural communities, but those mothers or people addicted to opioid, they're receiving compassion. And thank God, I'm not saying they should be criminalized, but I'm saying that there's a distinct difference because of the bodies that the epidemic impacted. There were tons of Black grandmothers raising their daughters and sons' kids because they were addicted to drugs. And those youth were seen as at risk. Yeah. Your home, there's something dysfunctional in your home,
as opposed to
because you're
resilient.
Right, because your grandmother is raising you. Where the children who are being raised by their white grandmothers, they're giving speeches at the white grandmothers gave speeches at the Democratic National Convention in 2016 and were hailed for stepping in when their children were addicted to drugs. And I'm not saying that that shouldn't happen. I'm saying it did not happen, and it set off a series of events that led to the mass incarceration that we have today. And it is solely based on because it wasn't based on the economics of the people, because Black people using crack, it was middle class communities. So I'm dominating the time.
So you have two heavy questions that were just posted.
Okay.
I think you guys would be interested in hearing these questions. So one question is, a person stated, I'm wondering if some of the physical DNA markers that are left from the stress and trauma of slavery are now producing Black children with defiance and behavioral issues. All of that heightened stress causes the fight or flight mode, and that changes the structure of the brain, right?
Well, I'm sort of going to challenge the premise of the question, because the epigenetics that we were talking about, it doesn't change.
It doesn't change the gene itself.
It doesn't change the gene. It doesn't change the molecule of its expression of the gene, but it changes its expression. It shows characteristics of the gene. Yeah, it shows that this trauma has had an impact on you. But the other thing that I'm going to change is challenges defiance and misbehavior, right? According to whose system and institution. Yeah. Right?
Because people might see that as being maladjustment.
Right.
But in actuality, it might be what needs to happen.
Right.
It makes sense given what people are experiencing.
So that's an example of looking at race as an issue versus racism. Because if you're looking at race, you're looking solely at the Black body and the being and seeing consistently across race, we may be getting this type of behavior. If you look at racism, we can say, what in this system and what in our systems and institutions is impacting these children in this way to make them behave this way? And are our systems and institutions conducive to their culture? Right? Because Black people have to shapeshift. What's the word for it? They have to code switch. Code switch. And some Black folks just don't want to do that. I'm one of them, which is why I'm an entrepreneur. So, because I know I can't work in corporate America. So I would change the lens that I'm looking at it through. I will say that epigenetics does have an impact on the way that it has an impact. It shows a definite impact on our DNA, and that we're carrying trauma. Yeah. Do you know what I'm saying? I hope that makes sense. Do you want to add something to that? Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next question. So the question is, with recent headlines addressing prominent men of color as perpetrators of sexual violence, what advice would you give to parents raising young men of color as far as directing them to positive representation of men of color and having honest conversations about how men of color are commonly portrayed in the media?
I think that's a wonderful question, and I think it's vitally important for us to have these discussions with young Black men, boys, so that they're aware. A lot of times we don't have this discussion. You cannot fully address something that you don't acknowledge. We have to have these conversations, and as difficult as they may be, we have to help them understand the history that Crystal was talking about earlier, as to how this impacts the way in which they're perceived and received in the society. So I think that is key.
I'm gonna I'm just gonna have to be 100 here. Okay, I'm just gonna have to be 100. In 30 seconds. Black people are gonna have to have a conversation about patriarchy and the impact that it has had on our community and how it perpetuates toxic masculinity and rape culture within our community. We're going to have a conversation about patriarchy and how by embracing patriarchy, we are literally mimicking white supremacy.
Yes.
And our healing and our freedom cannot mimic white supremacy in any way. And if it does, that's simply us switching places with white people, and it's a power grab. And if we are about freedom and healing, we really have to have a conversation about patriarchy. The question that I would, because I have sons, I have three boys and one girl, and the question that I would ask, that I would encourage Black parents to talk to their sons about is, how are we building a community? Because Black women and Black girls are less likely to report intimate partner violence because they don't want to get Black men in trouble. I worked in a domestic violence shelter, and most of the women who came into those shelters looked like me, but most of the people serving them did not. So they didn't have a way of connecting with them culturally. Black women are more likely to be killed by their abuser. So we have to have some serious conversations about patriarchy. And what I would encourage Black parents to do is ask Black men, what are we doing in our community that, what are we building or creating in our community that encourages Black girls and Black women to come forward when they are abused? And how are we raising Black men or Black boys to amplify and support Black women, not through a lens of patriarchy? And here's the other thing that happens by going through a lens of patriarchy. It's something funny. It's like the reason that if we look through a lens of patriarchy, the reason the Black community is failing is because Black women are the backbone of the community. Yet we praise Black women for being the backbone of the community. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? And so it doesn't even make sense. We really have to take a look at patriarchy, and we have to rip up and throw away and never again refer to the Moynihan report.
Yes. Very true.
Unless we're talking about how wrong and detrimental it was to the Black community.
I would also like to add, in addition to having to look at patriarchy, we have to pay attention to hip hop culture. We have to pay attention to social media, mass media in general, and all these narratives that we have that reinforce this internalized violence that we see that's happening in the Black community. Some of these reality shows that in order for them to get ratings, we need to have Black women calling each other out of their names and disrespecting one another. We have we accept these narratives that are very negative and dangerous to not only Black women, but to Black men.
Yeah.
And we don't pay attention to that, and that becomes problematic.
And this is a conversation that needs to happen amongst Black people. This is not a conversation that you conflate with white supremacy. Okay. So one of the things that Speaking Down Barriers did, which is an organization that Dom and I are part of and facilitate for, is that we had separate conversations about race and racism between Black people and white people. There was a dialogue once a month just for European white people called Learning Us. Mm-hmm. And there was a dialogue that Dom and I facilitated just for Black people, people who of African descent throughout the diaspora, that was called Healing Us. And these are the conversations that we had, because if you have the conversations together, it conflict. What ends up happening is it turns into a conversation of what Black people need to do to get themselves right. Right? And which right means how to be more like white people. You conflate the issues. And so it really needs to be a separate conversation because the histories diverge. Yeah. And so the solutions are going to be different.
And we also need to be aware that patriarchy is real. It's very real. And it has a negative impact on everyone.
Men and women. Yes. Men and women. Yes. Men and women.
So you have another loaded question. It says, as a budding midwife, I think about what you have offered in the context of healthcare. Through the lens of race, we screen Black and women of color differently than we do their white counterparts. Yes. Yes. I struggle with when and how to apply guidelines that have been founded on the race outside the context of racism. What harm am I doing by generalizing while trying to ensure the safety of my clients?
I think as a birth worker myself, I think this thing is twofold. I think that I do have a problem with screening clients by race instead of, again, examining the system and institution, the system that these people are going to be part of. What I do is I screen the system and how it can have an impact on my client. Now, I've only served Black women so far. So what I look at is, okay, so what doctor are you, or midwife, are you going to? Okay, so here are their policies, and here's what I know about them, and is what happened to Black women who went there, and here were some of their experiences. So I screen the system.
And you help equip the mother.
And I help equip the mother with tools. Mm-hmm. And the key thing is I connect that mother to her body. First visit, we're on the floor, we're breathing. Because breath connects you to the body. And I equip her with language and knowledge about what's going on. Because what you find is that Black women think that, well, they're a doctor. Why would they, they're not lying, they know. And so they discount what they know. They may know information, but they don't know your body. But you're the only person who's lived with your body all your life. You know what I'm saying?
This brings me to think about Serena Williams when I don't know if you knew about what happened when she went to deliver. And she almost had, she had a blood clot, and she was telling the nurse.
And she knew her body. She knew her body. But the system said, we have to go through these protocols. So what I would have did with Serena was, have you talked to your doctor about blood clots? If you have to have a C-section, blood clots can come. Have you talked about protocol and what they'll do in your case?
Knowing your body. Also educating, the fact that there's this belief that the Black body is impervious to pain.
Right.
So you know what? We're not going to get that.
Right. And they give Black people lower dosages of pain medication. So I would screen the system, and I would encourage your counterparts or your coworkers. I would really encourage them to think about changing the quote unquote screening. You know what I'm saying? Because again, the issue is not race. The issue is racism. Yeah. And I talk to the mom about stress and things that we don't even recognize as stress. How much are you working? Yeah. What are you doing after work? What's going on in your family? Okay, are you watching the news as a Black mother? Because that's adding stress and trauma to your body. Yes. Stress and trauma is on top of stress and trauma that's already there. And I also give them the history of Black birth workers, right? But I really screen the system. I encourage you to follow or visit Black Mamas Matter Alliance, blackmamasmatteralliance.org. It is an organization that brings together organizations and led by Black women and Black birth workers who are fighting to turn the tide of Black maternal health through a reproductive justice lens, because Black maternal health is really tied to reproductive justice. So I encourage you to look at them. If you are a Black midwife, look up Black Midwives Alliance as well, so you can, gain some support and insight. And if you are not Black, I encourage you to still visit Black Mama Matters Alliance, where you can get resources and information on how you can be better equipped to serve Black clients.
So you have a lot of comments, positive comments, and really enthusiastic comments regarding your presentation. One comment that came through was that it was confirming to my work. It's funny that you mentioned the Moynihan report. We just had a conversation in a class on this, and it was split 50-50. And it was nice to read for ourselves and not to be told that it was horrific, and had an opportunity to make my own decision through more in-depth research. I look at when Cosby said some things about Black men and the response, and I look at Obama and when he said something, same things about the Black man. Crystal.
Thank you.
And it's hard. It is hard work for Black people and Black folks in general to call our own to the carpet.
Yeah.
But it's not in the name of pettiness. It's in the name of our own healing.
Yeah.
We've got to do it. Now, Bill Cosby wasn't saying nothing that wasn't talked about at my Thanksgiving table amongst Black people, but that was still problematic. You're telling Black people to pull up their pants. Don't you know Martin Luther King was wearing a suit when they shot him in the face?
It's the respectability politics.
It's respectability politics. And we are a creative people. Somebody can name their child True and Apple and North, and it's cute.
Yeah.
But if I name my daughter Shaquana, which is really vowels that are indigenous to our language, then I'm ghetto because you can't pronounce it.
Mm-hmm.
And it don't follow English, which is a bastardized language anyway. It don't follow that phonetic spelling.
Yeah.
What he was saying was problematic. Same thing with Obama at Morehouse. And I love Obama, but why was there a this call to save Black boys? You know why? Because Black women we don't talk about the mass incarceration of Black women.
No.
And we don't talk about the impact that mass incarceration had on Black women. Do you know what I'm saying? So, but he got it together. Obama got it together at his next commencement speech at Howard. But that first one.
But this is what's disconcerting to me. When we think about Black people, when we think about what's going on with Black people, we focus on the Black man. We got to protect the Black man. The Black woman.
When we think about what's going on with Black people and race, we call on Black men to be on the panel. When we think about what's going on with women and sexism, we call white women to come to the panel. But the maternal health rates I'll give you an example. The maternal health rates in this country have been trashed for a long time. But you know why they're coming to the forefront now? Because Black women started to be on the front lines of Black maternal health. And that's brought all maternal health issues to the forefront and birth work issues to the forefront.
So real quick, guys, I know we're getting close to time. There's another question that came about I think is important. How can white people create space for African American vernacular so code switching is not needed?
You don't judge your language. I mean, it's like you just don't judge your language. The way that I'm talking right now is the way that I talk when I'm in front of white folks.
And I think it's important for white people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. So many times I experienced where white people are expecting a Black person to do things differently to make them feel comfortable. So if we're having a conversation with Crystal and a white person's here and they'll look to me and be like, what does she mean by that? I don't know, ask her. She's speaking English, ask her. Deal with your own discomfort, own it, it's okay. There are spaces I get into and I'm not comfortable. I have to deal with that, own it, not looking for somebody else to make me feel comfortable. Unfortunately, this is what historically Black people have had to do.
And recognize that white people have been colonized as well.
Yes.
They had to indoctrinate white people in order to perpetuate racism.
And Chris, I would like to speak to what you mentioned about the code switching and you just being your authentic self. I think a lot of times when you're working in environments, when you work with people who are white, it's about being brave as being Black to be your authentic self and speak the way you speak. But what happens oftentimes is the whites perceive your authenticity as being aggressive of how you're speaking. And so you're perceived in a way of that's really unkind, but it's stereotype. It's stereotyping us again in terms of how we're presenting, how we're being perceived in our presentation. And
it's policing.
Yeah.
And when you're policing it's funny that when Black people are policed, non-Black people and white people are the ones who feel threatened. And I'm like, I should feel threatened. I'm the one who's being policed right now. And that's what I do. When someone tells me, you're making me uncomfortable, I'm like, my anxiety is rising as well. My anxiety is rising as well because you are policing the way that I talk and the way that I move and the way that I express myself. So I too am not comfortable.
And I think what I admire about you, Crystal, is the fact that you are rooted in your freedom. That enables you to be brave, to be your authentic self. Absolutely. And so many times we in the Black community have been conditioned to not be our authentic selves because we compare ourselves to Eurocentric white standards of normality, as opposed to just being us. And so that becomes very taxing, emotionally taxing, and it takes a toll on us and re-injures us, And so that's something that we have to be sensitive to. So I do appreciate that comment and that question.
And just real quick, I wanted to give my podcast a shout out. It's called Dim Black Mamas Podcast. You can look us up and listen to all our episodes at dimblackmamas.com. Dom is also a licensed marriage and family therapist. I don't know why she didn't do a slide showing all the stuff that she does, but she's also a facilitator and she's the head of the board of Speaking Down Barriers, which is an organization that is committed to dismantling systemic and institutional oppression in a grassroots way through dialogue, arts, and deep listening within communities.
And we really, really believe in the ability to transform ourselves as a collective through our differences and not allowing our differences to be seen or viewed as a source of division.
And what we can do, Tashina, is we can put together a bibliography and also maybe include like the videos and the quotes that we show.
So you want to share the
No, I don't think we haven't decided on whether or not we're going to share the PowerPoint, but we can share just the bibliography and the videos and the videos that we have that we showed today. I think that would be important.
Yes.
Yeah.
And please feel free to reach out to us, speakingdownbarriers.org or Them Black Mamas to reach Crystal or myself. We would really, really appreciate your time. We thank you. We know we went a little bit over. We do apologize for that. But this information is so vital and so important. And you are so important. And your opinions are important. So we thank you for sharing that.
And so before we close out, I just want to let you guys know people are currently submitting comments saying, thank you. This was powerful. They want your contact information. Just so that you guys know that Dr. Chukwu and Crystal will be at our prevention summit this June. So Speaking Down Barriers will be in Philadelphia, so you'll get to meet them in person on June the 11th, 2019 at our prevention summit at the Convention Center. So if you want to check them out, come to the prevention summit and meet them in person.
And meet some of our other members of our team too.
Yes.
So
we're excited. Looking forward to it.
Yeah. Right, so they'll be in Philly. Also, this webinar will be shared. It's been saved, and so if you want to review what's been presented, we'll let you know when we'll post it for a review. For those of you who paid for your CEUs and weren't able to attend the webinar, we will have it saved for you to review to get your CEUs. If you have any questions after this, please feel free to email cheetah@cheetah.org. We can answer all of your questions specific to this webinar. Dr. Chukwu, Regina Chukwu, and Dr. Irby.
Well, I'm not a doctor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Do you want to say something before you leave? I do think part of us healing is us being able to see and acknowledge the Black body in its uniqueness, its acumen, its beauty, its spirit, its strength, and its resilience. This, we need to appreciate that and see it as an asset without commodifying it or without trying to obtain capital gain from the Black body.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vidrine, for that. And thank you, Crystal. I'm sorry.
I know that's hard work, so I don't claim it.
So thank you guys for being a part of this webinar experience. Thank you, presenters. It was awesome experience. And on that note, have a great day and take care. Be blessed.
Thank you.
You too.
At 11:15. 1:15.
No, I thought they said
You might want to mute yourself for a moment. Wait a minute. Don't hang out. Wait a minute. Happy to disconnect them. They still on. Remove. Can you close them out? Right here. I want to still see them. Like I want to still talk to them.
Oh, yeah.
I need them to get off. Okay, so I'm going to close out and I'm going to just call you guys.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Toodles.
Bye-bye.